Las opiniones expresadas por los invitados en este podcast son propias y no representan necesariamente la opinión de la doctora Xochitl Yadira ni de Trascendencia en Acción. Welcome to Trascendencia en Acción. I'm Dr. Xochitl Yadira. In this podcast, we explore the active process of going beyond our personal, social, and professional limitations to reach a higher level of understanding and existence. Join us as we discuss strategies and share inspiring stories that demonstrate how transcendence manifests in concrete actions, leading to real and significant changes. Discover how you can transcend your limits and live a life full of purpose and fulfillment. The opinions expressed by the guests on this podcast are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of Dr. Xochitl Yadira or Trascendencia en Acción. Hola, hola, buenas tardes. Bienvenidos de regreso a Trascendencia en Acción. Soy la doctora Xochitl Yadira. Y hoy tengo el placer de tener conmigo a una amiga que conozco por más de 10 años que se llama Sam Maldonado, Samantha. Y por hoy vamos a hacer esta plática en inglés porque quiero que fluya, quiero que sea tranquila, quiero que sea muy cómoda para las dos. Entonces voy a empezar a un poquito con las introducciones. So today I'm really happy to have Sam Maldonado, who's a really good friend of mine for over 10 years now. Mm-hmm. And we're going to get into some deep conversations, but it's an honor to have you here, Sam. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Awesome. All right, so let's get to the meat and potatoes of our combo here. So I met you over 10 years ago yes. Through just different work that we were both doing at the time as employee resource group leads at our different companies. Yeah. And I know you're from Peru descendancy, but I'd like you to just start introducing your grassroots, where you come from, all of the great stuff.
All the stuff, right? The foundation. Yeah. So born and raised in Milwaukee. My mom was born in Peru, and my dad is from Milwaukee, German-Polish descent. So I always like to jokingly say I'm a Milwaukee mix, right? But if you look at me, you wouldn't necessarily think that I have Polish or German ancestry. I look more, Italian even. My ancestry is actually Italian from before Peru. So my mom was born there. They met at my great-uncle's house. She was up visiting her cousins. My dad was over at the same house visiting his best friend. And they ended up, awesome. Finding a way together for a while. So yeah, that's kind of me in a nutshell, where awesome. I came from.
So you pretty much was grassroots here in Milwaukee?
Yes.
And then you studied here?
Yeah, I mean, to be quite honest, I don't have a lot of family here. My dad's side is very small. I have my mom, my sister, my dad, and then everybody on my mom's side still in Peru. Like 98, 99% of everybody is still in Peru or in Italy, around the world. So
you go often to visit?
I would love to go more often, right? But it's a 10-hour flight.
Wow.
And, airfare is not, cheap.
Yeah.
So, WhatsApp is a very close friend of ours so that we make sure that we stay in touch and all the social media so we can all stay connected with each other.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, and obviously, as you grew up here as a Milwaukeean, right, you have to find your way. And with family, we've talked a lot about what that dynamic brings. Can you share a little bit what your upbringing was here and navigating that culture and even your Latina experience, right, as you started going to school and started your career, all of that fun stuff?
Yeah, for sure. So I would say I didn't have much of an insulation within the Hispanic Latina culture. My parents got divorced when I was 5. And so... I lived predominantly with my mom all the time, so my dad on the weekends, right? And there wasn't, again, a lot of that insulation of heritage and culture and tradition because it was all in another continent, really. Right. And so it was very hard, difficult even for many years of my life to kind of find a place where I felt like I belonged because I wasn't puro Latina, as some would say. I wasn't all white either. I was ethnically ambiguous many years, right? I was the exotic friend for a long time. And, because I went to MPS for grade school, then I went to suburbs in middle and high school. And even though there was somewhat diverse and I could hang out with anyone and everyone, I was really adaptable. I still didn't feel like I had that tight-knit, Hispanic culture to stand on. And so it wasn't until I got into more of my professional years that I found individuals of similar backgrounds or that would kind of welcome me in and kind of show me the ropes, if you will, where I felt where I could lean into more of that history, that tradition.
And that's interesting because I know in the recent years with this whole movement of diversity and inclusion and bringing your belonging where the place that you hold on to, I have to say, I do feel like we're in a little bit of a more privileged era right now where we can look left and right and find some similarities, or at least someone we can relate to. But to your point, right, like when you're going through the dynamic of like finding your identity because you're not from here or from there, right? Like we say in Spanish, ni de aquí ni de allá.
Right, yeah.
It brings a whole different dynamic. How was that to you in terms of like mental health and your development and trying to find what would become Sam today?
Oh, that's a loaded question.
Yeah.
Hence why I'm in therapy, right? No.
Hey, I got 2 therapists.
Right? Yeah. No, they say you're in therapy for those that are not in therapy.
Exactly.
Right? That's kind of the going saying.
Yeah.
No, I would say it's a lot of introspection, a lot of reflection, a lot of learning through the hardships, right? And recognizing where trauma in ways has kind of really, how would you say, conditioned me to who I am today, right? Yeah. Neither good nor bad, it is what it is, right? But it's given me some conditional skill sets. I can read a room real quick. I can pick up on energies real quick. I know how to code switch real quick. Yeah. All these things that were born from adversity, I can now leverage as a benefit and as an advantage. And so it's also recognizing where that's coming from, why it's happening, and not to over-index, if you will, in some ways, to be really self-aware, which allows you to really kind of own the moment in a way and be really agile and be very have that higher EQ so that you can meet people where they are because you know how it's felt and you know how it is to be judged or selected by certain criteria without ever even opening your mouth. Yeah. So it's a matter of that's their thing, not mine, and knowing how to kind of have that observant kind of, not dissociative, but kind of still that observant position to know like if it's a feeling, it's not me, or if it's a them thing versus me, where if they're like, oh, you're not Latina enough or you're not white enough or whatever it is, it's just like, this is who I am. I'm continuing to embody and live in it and build that solid self-concept. And that if they have an issue, that's their story, not mine. Which is really hard if you think about, because you talked a little bit of your transcendence, right? Like you went from having to learn to navigate a co-parenting situation. I don't know, were your parents close in raising you or? Yeah, I mean, they're still amicable. I mean, my dad still hangs out and comes to like holidays at my mom's house with her new husband. Like it's kind of the new normal, if you will. Yeah. And they're still very, very amicable. Like there's no bad blood. It was never anything sort of tense or anything like that. But there's my dad, to be honest, God love him, he still holds a candle for my mom, right? And so that also just adds a layer to contend with. Think about that, right? Like you mentioned the conditioning that we go through and the traumas, right? So kudos to you, first of all, for acknowledging that and then knowing that something had to change and going through therapy, if you will, or I call it our circle of trusted friends that we go to venting, everything. All the things. Because if you think about it, even in today's environment, right, the benefit of you having gone through that, was hardships, but it was the resilience, right? Correct. So as you pivoted, right, and went into growing and navigating that into your career, how did that translate into, did you start it in corporate early enough in your career right after college? How did that all work and translate it into that? Yeah. So funny story. I mean, I probably not everybody knows this because I'm not always going back like, look over here. Yeah. But I started off in Madison for 2 years. Went there pre-med, actually, because I wanted to be a pediatrician because I love taking care of kids. I did not know that. Right? We're getting some new tidbits today. We're spilling the tea, like our producer says, because that's Transcendencia en Acción is short tea. Yeah, exactly. So spill it, Sam. I'm giving you all the goods. So I want to be a pediatrician. Love taking care of kids. My daughter jokes. She's like, you want to be a pediatrician? Like, she doesn't think I have the patience for it. I'm like, maybe not for you, but for other kids. And I'm really good at all of the ologies, right? Biology, all like physiology, all that stuff. And then OChem, like organic chemistry, and we are not friends. And so that's kind of, what paved some of that. Anything that ends in "stree" for me. Stree. Yeah. And I also had a very difficult event happen in Madison that also prompted me to leave. So it was kind of that double down situation, recognizing it wasn't the most conducive environment for me to learn because I need to have that dialogue. I need to have the conversation to like challenge my thinking versus being 1 out of 400 in the back of a lecture hall where you can't even see the professor and then having to go meet with the TA. It's like, why am I giving all this extra time when I could just be efficient and really make the most of my time within a class to have that able to like digest and imprint the content. Yeah. So I transferred from Madison after 2 years, went for a semester at Milwaukee actually. So I pivoted from pre-med to psychology, took that as far as I could until I realized I'd have a doctorate to do what I wanted to do. And so then the employer I had at the time when I came back, the last class I had to take to get my psych degree was in the middle of the day. And my employer wouldn't let me take it.
Talk about, which we'll get in a minute, right? Like all that we've transcended over the years of the can'ts and can't do's that prevents you from growing.
Right. Yeah. So then another pivot, right? Yeah. It's about being resilient and tenacious and like, let's find a way through. And then I went, after many years having worked in the middle, like life gets in the way, right? So I stopped going to school for a few years and then went back, finished my undergrad at Alverno, which was a great place. Yeah. And it did the weekend college. And so then finished my undergrad in business and management in like 2 years. And then went right into my master's program and got my MBA. Wow. And so I had both of my children actually during my graduate program. So one weekend you see me waddling my ass around on the halls, and the next weekend's like, baby gone. And so a few of my friends that went through that program with me, you know, they're like, oh my God, I remember you getting out of breath, having to present because this baby's like pushing against your lungs, right? Yeah. And then the next week, it's like I'm walking around all, ever. So they've seen my kids, from when they were baby to now seeing them how they're old now.
And that's another dynamic, right? Like when you think about what prepares you for life and the next steps, right? And like, let's talk a little bit about that because I share a little bit about that in a session that I had. How sometimes, right, like dynamics, we talk about always about the gender gap as well and like the adversities that men versus women go through, but we're not the only ones. How many people have we seen being in the classroom pregnant and still pushing through because you have a goal in mind, right? And I think sometimes we make it seem easy because we know we have a goal in mind and make it happen, right? Like I share, I remember being pregnant as well, and I couldn't fit on the damn little booth, but I was there.
I would get it,
right? Like that's a different dynamic. Can you share a little bit about that? Because I know, like I have talked to quite a few friends right now that they went through something similar, and at the time they had to make the decision to drop out, and they're considering going back to school now, right? But let's talk a little bit about that because I think it's important for people to understand, like. It doesn't have to be one way or another, and it doesn't have to be in a specific time. It's whatever time works for you, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, life got in the way for like 5 years. And then the partner I had at the time, he's like, you should go back. Like, you need to go back. And that's what prompted me to go back. And then instead of like knowing myself, if I didn't pursue the MBA right away, I'm like, life's going to happen again. And so then I was like, let's just crank this jazz out. And I went from July, finishing my undergrad to August, starting my master's program. And then I was like, oh, I'm pregnant. Yay. God, of course, love my children. But I'm getting like all the 9-10 months of the program, then married. I had both of my children in 2.5 years. They're 16 months apart. And so I know my friends were giving me shit. At one point I was after having delivered, I was like, we're in the middle of a project for a group. And I'm like, let's jump on a call. They're like, Sam, you were in the hospital. You just had a baby. I'm like, I am sitting here watching reruns of Saved by the Bell. I am losing my mind. Like, at least
that's my safe place.
I can be productive and we keep moving this forward. I will not be the leaden ball that's not gonna, And of course, this is me. They're like, Sam, take a break. And I'm like, no, we can do it. We're, So again, that's also something that I continue to work on. It's just because I can doesn't mean I always should.
Yeah. And that's important. So we'll come back to that because I definitely want to dive into that one for sure. So then you went through all that, pushed through, and then when did your corporate career per se started like taking off?
Yeah. So I'll also preface this kind of giving some additional context. I've always been the overachiever in a way. Again, because I can.
We're type A.
Type A, alpha. I have a lot of energy. I can process really quickly. I have a high capacity. Like I'm processing T when someone's describing D. And so I was in all of the clubs doing all the things in high school, right? Some people may not even know that I was a wrestling manager in high school all 4 years.
Oh my God. I can always only picture you.
Like I'm not on the mat by any means, but I was like running the books and like I'm not the coach by any means. Right. But I was doing all the jazz. And so like yearbook, Spanish club, all the, like newspaper, all the things. Right. And so when I finished my master's and then I went, I didn't do corporate right away. I went into nonprofit. I was actually a director of volunteer engagement and volunteer engagement and coordination, if you will. So I was managing both the development and 15 different events that we had throughout the season at the Symphony, as well as managing our volunteer corps.
The Symphony in Milwaukee?
Yeah, the Milwaukee Symphony. Mm-hmm. And so I was challenged with building our volunteer corps while still managing a change leadership process.
Oh my God.
And still managing 15 different events that had a development component to it. And the funny thing was, I always said this, like my capstone for my master's was nonprofit change leadership. And I'm like, am I being punked? Like this is too much similar to what I just wrote my capstone paper on, to me taking on this job. Yeah. But before that, before I finished my master's, before I left, I did have history and experience in working at corporate, like at Time Warner Cable in the business office and telecom. So knowing how telecom changes every day, knowing how to pivot and knowing how to work with different business owners and learning how to code and all this junk from back in the day. So it's been fits and starts here and there. But after I was at the Symphony for about a year, I was also one of the founding members of Prospanica Milwaukee.
Oh, yeah.
And so that was around that time where we had held an event at EWM, and we had some NM panelists speaking, and so some senior leaders even. And I was raising my hand, like, so how does someone get a job at NM? Like, do this. I'm like, done. Okay, what else do you do? They're like, you do. I'm like, done. And so I'm like, you're not telling me anything new. And so a bunch of us, because I was on the board, we went down to the union afterwards, and we're kind of chatting with all the panelists. And I'm like, so let's have a little chat, you know?
Right.
And from that, exchanged information. And then let's say that was a Friday. On Monday, I got a phone call saying, I have a job. I want to connect you with the hiring leader. And so that's what then started the 6-year tenure that I had when I was at NM.
And that's when we met, right? And so let's talk a little bit about that, right? Like, what does that mean? Because I have dived in a little bit into the nonprofit. And I always say a nonprofit is like being an entrepreneur because you do it all. And bless the heart of those that run a nonprofit because, man, you do it all. Oh my God,
so many competing priorities.
Yeah. How was that pivoting from that to the corporate world? Because, the corporate world is another
It's a whole
dynamic.
other animal. A whole other animal. Yeah, I mean, nonprofit, it's still a business.
I don't call it animal. I call it a whole nother monster.
Yeah. Monkey, fire, dump, all the things, right? Just keep building. Coming from nonprofit to corporate, I mean, I already had some corporate experience when I was at Time Warner before it got bought out. And then going to nonprofit, that was the pivot. I'm like, we have 28 people. Yeah. I have to raise how much money? And this is our budget now. And I knew in the heyday, it was like double budget, triple the amount of staff. I'm like, wait, what do you want me to do?
Yeah. Work your magic.
Exactly right. Find a way, figure it out. And it was funny, I had spoken with the former board chair at one point. He's like, yeah, Sam, your job was really worth 2 people's worth of work. I'm like, thanks for recognizing that after the fact that I left. But I mean,
at least you got some acknowledgement.
Right, I got some validation. Yeah, I'm like, thanks, Doug, But you do it because it touches your heart, right? So I'm a mission-oriented person. I'm not one to just move widgets along because then I would just lose my mind. Right. I would just be really bored. I need the variety. I need to kind of get my hands, and in heavy, stuff.
Right.
And so that's one of the reasons why I left the Symphonies, because I wanted somewhere to grow and to continue to develop and ascend and try my hand at different skills. Because at the Symphony, while I loved it, if I wanted to move up, it was VP and then CEO. Right. There was nowhere else to go, right? Yeah. And so, that's what kind of prompted it. And it's, again, finding your rhythm, kind of knowing how to navigate the organizational structure, securing mentors, reaching out and making those phone calls, right? Just having that tenacity, be like, I don't know, let's have a chat, and that's how I made a lot of the relationships that I had when I was at Northwestern Mutual.
So when you were at NM, I recall, because I started there about 7 years ago, and then I come in and then you leave me.
Sorry.
But the culture has changed a lot. How was that? Because, I mean, the numbers have increased, even in Latinos representation at NM.
Yep.
We still don't have what we should have, but it's moved.
Yeah.
How was that dynamic for you? How did that really inspire you to be like, been there, done that, I need to move on, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. Every business function had its own culture, for sure. So I went from working directly with the field, serving the field in some capacity of coaching, developing, and consulting them, to then moving to client services, which is kind of that intermediary between the field and the rest of the home office, like that pivot baton
Which
handoff.
none of those names exist today.
Exactly right. Like I could throw out FGD and only like the old OGs would know what I'm talking about, because FGD doesn't exist anymore. Field growth and development, for anyone that pays attention to the old NM history. But yeah, I was like one of a handful. There wasn't many of us. I was a member of the founding group of the Hispanic ERG, and kind of figure out, what do the bylaws look like? What does an executive sponsor mean? Like, what is our identity? How do we make this work in a new culture that may not know how to engage with us or leverage us as an asset, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because it's like there's the options of like affinity group or what have you, or ERG versus BRG. And even though we were called an ERG, we were functioning like a BRG. Like we had a direct business relationship.
Yeah, so an ERG is Employee Resource Group.
Yep.
A BRG is a
Business Resource Group. Right. So the variance is that the Business Resource Group has like a direct correlation to like the operational success and growth of the business, right? So when they're saying, hey, we want to maybe come out with like a Spanish product or do in language collateral, can you help us, right? Or can you do focus groups or different sort of, engagements to help us engage, connect with that market before we go to full market and like, something just falls flat.
Yeah.
So that's leveraging the assets that are really already there. And then you have like the triple bottom line. You have retention, you have investment, you have exposure, PIE for all those involved. But it's also then deciding, are people nominated to those roles in leadership? Are they voted on? Are they kind of plucked and placed, Yeah. And so that kind of figuring out that dynamic of different leadership roles and what gets what.
And let's be honest, at that time, it's not like you had a lot of Latinos to choose from to move into the pipeline to begin with, right?
Correct, right.
And it's interesting because we just had a session, and one of the, thanks to you and setting that foundation at NM, one of the Hispanic ERG leads today, she is an ally.
Oh, great.
And she's amazing. Yeah. Christina, shout out to my girl, Christina. She's married to a Peruvian, but I know her because we used to be in the same leadership team when I was at JCI, right? And we talked a lot about that, like, when you have people stepping in, like so much has changed on what's an ally versus you belonging. Like you don't have to be to belong. But to your point, like dynamics, I can only imagine how hard it was to be in like setting up the stage, setting a vision when you don't have enough people to pull from, right?
Right.
The representation
it was
wasn't
a working board, if you will. Like it wasn't just like, oh, we'll meet and like things will just happen magically. No, we had to create it from the ground up.
Yeah. I remember because I was the lead at the time. I was the chair of the ERG at my previous employer. And that's when we connected because you guys were starting, and it was definitely interesting. So we talked a little bit about of your beginnings, the dynamics of growing up, going to college, accomplishing your career, joining NM. Let's talk a little bit about of the departure, right? What ignited Sam to move on and pursue what really is the foundation of who you are, which is your vision, your mission, what drives you, right? When and how did that happen?
Oh, that's a great question. That's a loaded question. I think
I'm full of loaded questions.
I love
We're
it.
all about spilling the tea.
I love it. Yeah, no, I don't go for that she like little shallow bullshit. Like, give me the goods, the deep gooey stuff. That's what makes matters real.
Yeah.
I would say there's like, again, to that very point, getting deeper has always been something that's driven me, and like this high level little like just learn the basics. There's like I would go beyond, right? And so I was kind of reading the writing on the wall that there really wasn't much of opportunity for me to move around within the organization. And I wanted to take my skill sets on my own terms. And so that's when my ex-husband and I started a consulting firm where he was doing marketing and advertising, and I was doing human talent consulting asset-related work, like focus groups, coaching, things of that nature, and dabbling within the DEI space at the time, because it's a lived experience, like we've talked about. It's nothing I could actually just like study and like just regurgitate, but it really is speaking from me as a model, my experiences, and then, aligning that with practicing the content and the expertise. and doing that for a while, and then went back to corporate because we both couldn't play in the sandbox. You know, someone had to get the benefits and do all the things, right? And so then I went back to corporate, and then I was a managing director for the state of Wisconsin for Principal Financial. So I was responsible for all the development and coaching for all of our financial advisors for the state.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
And so would you say that was the moment where you realized this is where I belong? This is what I see myself doing, consulting. And that's kind of what ignited your passion to realizing, right? And I'm going to read a statistic here because it's interesting, right? A lot of us talk about like, and I talked a lot with this, my brother, and the first podcast that we did is like, what do you do with the wealth of knowledge you acquire throughout the years? How do you pour it back, right? And we've seen a really high increase in consulting firms. Yeah. And so even right now, women make up about 45% of the consulting workforce, but we still only hold about 25% of those senior roles, right? And what does that mean? And we already know about the gender pay gap and all of that. Yeah. So as you made this pivot and this change in your career and you discovered, right, how has that been for you? What are some new learning and challenges and now you've encountered?
Oh, it's both scary, exciting, and gnarly all at the same time, right? It's, you don't know, you have to test your mettle, right? You know, it's like
another level of consciousness, right?
Yeah. You're like, I've hustled for how long? I have to hustle even more now, you know? Like you know how to hustle in certain environments amongst certain dynamics.
Do you have like a little deja vu, like kind of going back to your nonprofit days? Because it does, in essence, feel the same, right?
You have to MacGyver stuff together, like no tomorrow. And if someone were to look at my resume, they're like, explain to me the spaghetti mess, right? Because there's no clear line of entry.
I know.
Because it's like I go from telecom to nonprofit to financial to consulting to financial to retail and then entrepreneur and, nonprofit-ish consulting again.
Which we'll come back to that because that's another dynamic of, like the whole dealing with how leadership is sought out and people think that it has to be linear.
Oh God, no. If you're linear, I'm actually concerned for you because then you have such a limited perspective.
Thank you.
To be quite honest.
Yeah. But keep going.
Yeah.
I pivot there because I'm like, oh, that's like a pain point for me. It's like, wait, what? You want me to be in a job for 20 years and have no broader experience? Like,
yeah,
don't you see the richness of what I'm bringing here?
100%, right? Like the transferable essential skills, maybe they're not like quote unquote one-to-one. Like I'm not born and bred HR for like 20 years, but I have experience that would actually add to the role because I have perspective and variety and I know it's work.
Which there's nothing wrong. If you like that and want to stay on it for 25 years, go for it.
Right? But it's like a lot of organizations just want that like pure breeding, if you will, for lack of a better word.
I think millennials came to knock our socks off of that, right?
They're like, that doesn't work so well anymore, right? But yeah, it's again kind of knowing how to trust yourself. Like, I'll figure this out. Like, if it's a hard day, give yourself a pity party for 24 hours, and you're like, and fuck this noise. I'm gonna figure this out again, right? I'm gonna like for a day, and then ask the questions, reach out. Like if you need help, ask for help, right? But that's also what I've learned about myself is I don't have to do it all by myself.
Yeah. Lean on the village that you built along the way.
Yeah, like lean on those board of directors that I've cultivated over the years that I've poured into them and they can pour into me, vice versa. Knowing the skill sets that they can provide and just making the most. So it's not like it's not tit for tat by any means. It's not like just a tactical relationship. There's interest, there's depth, there's wanting each other to succeed, but they have a certain skill set that I don't. And I'm like, hey, this is what I'm trying to figure out. I need some eyes, right? Give me some fresh eye perspective on this.
Yeah.
And it's getting rid of the ego, right? Like being an entrepreneur, you're like, I have to eat what I kill or kill what I eat. And that can be very daunting. Yeah. And I did that for like a year and a half. And that's then also why I joined a consulting firm that focuses on nonprofit business strategy, just because as a single mom now, I needed reliability and consistency in revenue. And while I had some great clients over the last year and a half on my own, it was just like pop, 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 and not like pop, right? Where I need the consistency to pay for tuition and pay for all the things, right? That granted, while corporate is great, it's also an illusion of safety. Right. You think you're safe because you have a regular paycheck.
Illusion of it's not the comfort of.
No, it's an illusion of safety.
Yeah.
Because they could let you go tomorrow, right? But you think you're safe because you have a standing paycheck, you have benefits. No. Like you have a system and a structure and you have this ongoing rigor.
Yeah.
But it's like, one side's difficult and has some great things. Another side's difficult and has some great things. It depends upon what you're willing to work through and what you're willing to accept.
Yeah. And just think about how powerful that is, right? Like the experience that you brought, the resilience that you've acquired, right, through life experiences, being brave to take a risk and get out of the comfort zone to start something on your own. But then we're going to get a little deeper, right? Yeah. Then you add the dynamics that over the last few years, right? I mean, we all talk about the pandemic, and to like turn our world upside down.
Yeah.
But that awakens something in a lot of us, right?
Yeah.
And realizing like what we thought of Cinderella dreams and starting a family, right? Shit happens. We part ways. But then you have to talk a little bit about that, dealing with starting your own business, starting your own, and then going through a divorce, and then having to deal, knowing what it is being a child of divorced parents, and knowing I have to be now mindful of how I'm bringing that dynamic for my own kids.
100%.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, 2023 was a loaded year.
Yeah.
Loaded year.
Understated.
Understated. They say like one big thing a year.
Like when we talk about badass chingonas, this is where I emphasize, like I have friends that when people think about it, right? Like, oh, like she looks like nothing. Like she's all fresh. I was like, you don't know the shit she's been going through, and yet she still stands, right?
Yeah, most people don't know half the shit that I've gone through because they don't need to. It's my shit to deal with. It is what it is, but it's not.
And we're sharing it out for gossip, but so that others know that you're not alone.
Yeah, right. It's part of I don't make it my identity, but it's part of my history.
Yeah.
Right? So 2023, left corporate, started my own job, got divorced. I was even trying to move out of the house, but like, Sam, take a beat, right? I'm like, just throw it all at me at once, right? If I can, because I can, why not?
Should I?
Right. They're like, just take a beat. And so, I mean, in all honesty, I think I lasted longer in the marriage because I was trying to maintain that nuclear family that I did not have, right? I wanted to make sure that my kids were good. I was concerned for him, but I was not good in the process.
And how many people go through that, right? Like thinking like, maybe one more year. Maybe we'll make it work, right?
Yeah. Many, many years later, right? And it took me kind of going on a trip by myself with some girlfriends for a destination wedding, right? Because I was just in a different state of mind, different frame, that I was able to finally connect my head and my heart. Like I was logicalizing for every day, like, oh, this is it. I'm just maintaining, all the things. But I would be so sad and lonely all the time in a marriage. And that's not how I wanted to live my life. And I'd even talk with my kids, like they don't need to know all the intricacies. That's not for them to know.
And they're still young. What are the ages?
14 and 13.
Yeah.
But I'd at least say to them, like, would you be in a relationship if you're unhappy, if you're not able to meet each other's needs and feel fulfilled and feel like you have that support, and it kind of just giving them, that seed, if you will. And, and him and I, though, we both agreed point blank day one when we both said this is what's going to happen, that the path of least disruption was the priority for them.
Right.
So even though he and I didn't work out and we weren't, good, compatible romantically, we are good when it comes to maintaining what's best for the kids. That's for sure. And
that's so important, right? And I want to emphasize that because in today's society, we talk too much about mental health. So I was reading a statistic earlier that says that about 50% of children in the next 5 years will be experiencing living in a co-parenting situation or with single parents by the age of 18.
Yeah.
That's a huge statistic. But there's a lot that goes with that, right? Like, why does it have to be hell for them?
No, right.
Like, why? I mean, we're in a time and period where we've advanced so much in society. Can we just be adults and put them as a priority and put all of our side, like all of our shit aside, right? Like whatever didn't happen or whatever happened should be part of the couple dynamic, not the children's problems, because then it translates into
then they're taking on the trauma, right? And then they're going into therapy. Like, I mean, I think everyone should be in therapy, no doubt. I mean, it's like a life hack, right?
Like why don't we have more therapists available? Let's
I'm putting out a PSA, please. We need more therapists. Yeah, therapists of color. Let's say
right. And people that please are educated and know about these topics.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. They're not feigning when on TV.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, even when I talk to my children, I'm like conveying life lessons that I've learned hard way and what I've, kind of reflected on and kind of had insights on through therapy with them. Right. And even though that's kind of like, it feels like it's like off one ear at the other, I'm like, I keep saying it, hoping like one day it's going to imprint. And sometimes I see little glimmers. I'm like, okay. But I'm like, there's adults that are still wrestling on how to figure this shit out. Yeah. And I'm trying to tell you at 13 and 14, so you learn it now. So it's not like you're 28, you're like, oh shit.
Normalize it, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Talk it out. Just be like, okay. And then just move on. Like recognize it, own it, move through it, and then you're good. But you can't just like put it away, be like, I'm fine. And then no. Then it's going to blow up one day.
It's so hard too, because sometimes you still want to give them the time and space to process things.
100%, yeah.
But then how do you know when it's time to intervene as a parent and help them navigate that versus giving them space and time, right? And at the same time, you're trying to like
manage your own self, manage your own shit, right?
Yeah.
I've talked to them. I'm like, feel the feelings, own them, recognize them. But if they start taking away from your day, then that's when we need to talk about it, right? Like you could be upset, fine, but don't be disrespectful, right? You could feel the feels, honor them, own them, recognize them for what they are, but they are not who you are. It is just what you are feeling in the moment, right? Do not identify. If you made a mistake, you are a bad person. No, you made a mistake. That's it, right? Learn from it, do better from it, and that's all we can ask, right? It's like I tell my kids, make a mess, just clean it up.
Right. I love that analogy. And I think sometimes, even as adults, right, I think we're from like the same generation. We won out our date, but
we're not aging ourselves.
Yeah, we're still in our double 20s and we're loving it, right?
Yes.
But it's so funny that sometimes, even when I think about my own upbringing, like we didn't have these conversations. No. We didn't normalize talking to therapists. It's like, no estoy loco. Like, why would I go to therapy, right? Like, it's so important. But I think for kids especially, so I have my oldest, she's going to be 22, and then I have my 18-year-old and I have my 10-year-old. And that is something I'm pushing right now. Like, let's get therapy. Let's talk to somebody you trust. But I think beyond that is also realizing that you don't have to have your shit together because that pushes another boundary. And I think I'm seeing that in society right now where like even with Emily, right, my oldest, like she's going to be graduating, she's going to be a senior, and she's already probably thinking, I was like, if you need to take a gap year, take it. Yeah. I'll be here to support you. If you want to go back into the workforce, do whatever. Do what your heart tells you to do, because I think that's another standard that I feel I had to grow up so quickly. I didn't even have time to process, right?
I know.
And think about it, like you went from being a student to being a mom to be a full, right? Like how do you unpack and decompress through introspection, as you were talking, right? Like now knowing, do I want to do it? Should I do it?
Right.
How do you go through that process? Like now that you've gone through all this journey, when does Sam pause and calls herself out?
Oh, that's the question.
Yeah.
Does Sam know how to? That is the actual question.
How do you catch yourself?
Yeah. And not operate on default. And that's the main thing. I think a lot of people that know me just see me doing all the things all the time. Right. They're like, when do you sleep? And I'm like, I just kind of joke about it, right?
I just came straight from New York into the studio, right? And people literally be like, oh my God, you're living your best life. I'm like, I am.
Right. But it
my
takes
chimba
a toll.
de vida.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's exhausting.
Probably tomorrow I'll be crying in my bed, decompressing from a hectic week, because we have to learn how to decompress. What does that look like?
Yeah. I would say it's finding my joy again. Not the distractional joy.
Like, let's go dancing salsa at 3:38.
No, that's great. That is great. I am not knocking that, because that does give me joy, right?
Yeah.
It's
Plus
not,
you burn calories.
It's a triple win, right? You're socializing, you're working out, it's good for your mental health, it's cathartic, all the things.
Yeah.
No, but like distracting of like, watching TV, right? You're going to place in time, but you're not marathoning 5 shows in a day, right? But like looking back at like 8-year-old, 10-year-old Sam, like what really sparked joy in your heart? And not to sound like Pollyannish or all like cheesy, but it's sometimes like in really thinking back, I had to parentalize myself from a very young age because I didn't feel like adults in my life. I could trust them with the weight of my feelings or what was on my mind.
How many of us go through that?
And so I've just I'll take care of it. Like if some things get overwhelming, I'll just hermitize and I'll get the shit done.
But
right?
even in relationships, right? I talk a lot about this with my friends because we talk a lot of like the feminine energy and the masculine energy. And they're like, you have a really high I'm like, I know.
Right.
Because I had to. Right?
Right. The situation called for
step up, then I won't have to. And then,
Figure
when you step up, then I'll lower it down, right?
But I have to relearn how to do that.
It's that. And then it's the parenting. And then it's the being my whole self, right? But you just said something that is really interesting when you pause and recognize that and not falling into it, because it's such a fine line, because that's when the victim mentality comes in, right? Yeah. How do you catch yourself? Like, this is enough for me to decompress. Now I got to pivot and keep going.
Yeah. It's kind of really checking in with your body and like checking in with that voice in your head, right? Because it's, again, not to use the word dissociative, but it's like you're the observant, like who is that voice that you're hearing, right? Is it you, or like, where is that voice coming from, right? And recognizing, is it saying you're being lazy? Is it saying you're not doing enough? Is it saying you should get another, credential? Is it saying you should be doing X, Y, and Z? And is it telling you because, you're need something to do and you're just not, you're always kind of just fulfilling something that you feel is not you find value in achievement, right? You find value in what you can contribute. And is it really you're trying to find value because it's really providing you joy, or it's because it's filling a hole that you think needs to still be filled, where you're like already not enough in some capacity, right? And I like the analogy of like you already are enough, and sometimes the swinging light bulb catches that and you're in the spotlight, and sometimes it swings away and it swings away. But you're still there and you're still enough. It's just sometimes the spotlight hits you and sometimes the 15 minutes passes, right?
And it's okay when the spotlight is not on you. Those shadow moments, I call them your moments to do whatever the heck you want. Yeah. Right? And it could look so much different. Like for me, I can tell you, it's like, I like alone time. Like there's no tomorrow. Leave me the heck alone. Whether that means I'm in my phone for a little bit or just listening to music or just whatever. I need that moment alone. Yeah. Because I'm finding and I'm learning that I never had that. Yeah. And to your point, like sometimes we have to step on roles that we didn't even know about and signed up for. And nobody told us, do you have to? Right. I went through a therapy not too long ago. To shout out to my therapist, Monica Venegas. That was brutal, but it helped me so much. Where she had me reconnect with my 5-year-old, and she had me go to a very traumatic event that I lived, and literally be like, close your eyes, picture yourself in that moment. This little girl in a yellow dress, crying her heart out because her parents were having a discussion, whatever. And that was the hardest thing, to your point, because when you can find that presence moment of reconnecting to what would that look like, and telling yourself, you're not alone anymore. Yeah. You're not vulnerable. I'm here for you. This is my grown-up version. I'm going to have your back, right?
Being that person that you didn't have when you were that age.
And then being that for your kids as well, right? Like give them that safety zone. What does Sam like doing now? What brings you joy?
What does Sam like do? I'm still figuring that out, really. Being a year post being divorced, it's like I'm putting those pieces back together.
Are you relearning to recognize yourself?
100%. I mean, I would say a lot of me, to a degree, went dormant in some ways, in some capacities, right? Of what made me happy and like finding that joy and holding on to it and honoring that time for myself, because my life was consumed with what I could control, right? Which was work, which was my board service, which was taking care of my kids, right? Because other pieces of my life I felt like were out of control. So that's when I poured all my energy in things that I felt I could control. And that didn't allow me to find that balance of that head and the heart, like I mentioned. It was all head all the time. Yeah. And so my heart, and what kind of, again, gave me joy and reconnecting with my heart, has taken time.
What does that look like, connecting your head and your heart?
It's long 11-mile walks down by the lakefront. It's going dancing with girlfriends. Yeah. It's being by myself. Yeah. And I recognize for many years that I'm what you call like one of those extroverted introverts or introverted extroverts.
Same here.
Right? And people always, connect with extrovert or introvert, but those are the extremes, right? When you think about the bell curve.
What is the middle one right now? Ambivert, something like that?
Right, okay. Ambivert. So if you think like ambivalence, but that's not the relationship. Right. But the majority of the bell curve, the population of people are ambiverts. Like like we could have high rally moments, running summits, running events, and then you don't hear from us for another 48 hours.
Exactly.
We need to recharge.
That'll be me this weekend. Yeah. I am going to be alive, but I will be disconnecting.
Exactly. Right. And someone's like, are you mad? Are you okay? I'm like, I'm just quiet. Right. I don't have the on energy right now. I just need to be
I tell my friends, if you
quiet.
don't hear from me in a 2-day period, then check in on me.
Yeah.
2 days, I'll give myself a little break. But after 2 days, like check up on me.
Yeah, exactly. If it's too quiet, it's too quiet. Right. But I'll also say sometimes it looks like I have everything together because I know how to make it look like I have everything together. Right. And only those very few people know what the behind the curtain looks like, right? And they've even said to this people that know behind the curtain, like, it looks like she has all of her shit together. She doesn't need any help. Everything's thriving. They're like, actually, because I know how to manage it and I know how to then, again, I hermetize and I take care of it myself. And I only ask those that I know that I can trust to, like, this is where I need help, right?
And let's talk a little bit about that, right? Because I think we fantasize on who your board of directors, we call it a lot, like your trusted friends should be.
Yeah.
And I always say, I have my group of friends for everything, right? Like the ones I know, like if I want to go dance, like I know who to count on. If I want to like chillax or certain topics, right? But it's so important to have at least a couple people in your life that really get the whole picture, but someone that brings no judgment, someone that really leans in, that really understands, and you can really trust with no
holds barred.
Nothing, right? Like, and I think it's so important to remind people it doesn't have to be fake either.
Right. No, I mean, and being very honest, it's taken me a long time to be able to trust women in a way. Because for many years, with my best of intentions, I'd go into it like, I love you, you're my sister, right? And for some whatever reason, it turned into competition or cattiness or lying.
Envious and all that
stuff.
Right.
And I'm like, I'm not here for that, right? Yeah. And so then my trust, my belief that this is going to be a real thing when I met people was, few and far between, to a point where they're like, you felt really guarded, like you felt really icy. And it was self-preservation because I was tired of getting my heart hurt by women I was trying to hold. Yeah. Right, trying to hold in reverence and like really believe like I can call you at a moment's notice and we're good to go or whatever it is, right? And it's taken me a long time to trust that I can really say whatever's on my mind without fear of some sort of retribution or judgment.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you. And I think sometimes friendships or relationships become very transactional.
Yeah.
And there's important to recognize what does a transaction look like for my benefit or your benefit versus true deep in, we're in it and we'll figure it out, whether it's a friend or a partner, right? It's so hard. Especially nowadays, I feel like, and I'm not even going to try to say it, but basically what my brother was attempting to say is that there's this info overload that is so toxic that is a blurred line of what is the information you're telling me that is true versus the stuff that you're just trying to portray to fill in a gap in the moment, right? It's so fake.
Yeah.
It's like we talk about AI.
Yeah.
And like, is it a real picture or is it the fake picture?
Right.
It looks so pretty. I think I might just go with the fake one because that's so much prettier than the real one.
It's like this philosophy question. Would you rather live a life with no pain? Or would you live a life with pain and knowing it's real?
I know.
Right? I'd rather have the realness and have the shit that comes along with it, but I know it's real. Right. And you grow and you learn through it, right? And even though some things didn't turn out the way I had hoped, in retrospect, looking back, I'm like, it's actually probably the better that it, it is what it is now.
So what's next for Sam?
What's next for Sam?
Where are you thriving right now and reconstructing yourself, finding yourself, that space? You're still doing consulting.
Yes.
Let's talk about the business you started and where your focus is right now.
Yes, thank you. So I have my executive leadership coaching and business consulting firm called Chaska Consulting. So
spell it out.
Yes, Chaska.
And we'll put the link up when we publish the episode.
Thank you. So Chaska is Quechua for bright star. So Quechua is the language of the Incas.
Nice.
So it's me paying an homage to my heritage. And so it's also symbolic, like bright star. You're trying to find a future point. And so, I've been able to do many different DEI coaching and webinar sessions, executive coaching sessions with different clients locally and across the country. So
that's awesome.
It's been great.
Yeah. And obviously my brother and I, right, we started our consulting firm. We're still formalizing, but a lot of it is like, how do we partner? How we elevate each other?
Exactly.
How do we
I mean, the pie is big enough.
my God.
The pie is big enough.
The world is big enough.
Yes.
Like we can all fit in. And if not, we'll go to the Milky Way. Like what the hell?
Partner to make it better and more, and such a
Yeah.
stronger argument when you can do things together
Yeah.
versus trying to decipher and siphon between people.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And a lot of that, how are you feeling in this moment now? Like this reviving, Sam, like I see you, you're so full of light and,
Thank you.
So passionate about what's come next.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like with your kids now and the dynamic? Like, right? Because a lot of what I talk a lot too is that we project to our
Yeah.
kids the failures and the rewards and everything in between, right? What do they say about the mom that they're getting now?
Yeah.
The new version of you.
Oh yeah, they're probably mortified because I'm like my goofiness is coming back out, like my silliness. Like I don't give a shit.
Oh boy, I don't know
give
you.
a shit. Right? Like literally, I was taking my daughter to my kids to school. My daughter was sitting in the front seat, and "Regulate" by Warren G came on.
Oh,
Turn that shit up to 10, and I sang every damn word of that song, and my daughter's looking at me like mortified. She's like, "Please stop." I'm like,
leave me
"Crank
a
it
block
higher."
away from home.
Yeah, I was like, and of course it's in the drop-off line, so I'm like, windows are down. I'm like,
God.
wrapping the whole thing, and she's like, just wants to crawl under a rock, and I'm like, try me, So it's like just dancing in my car again, just
Yeah.
like, again, it's just connecting and owning the moment. And we're like, this is what I want to do without some sort of self-judgment.
Right.
If I'm, waiting in line to go to the bathroom, I can dance, right? And it's
Yeah.
just, again, having that solid self-concept and continuing to fortify that is my project for me right now.
And I love that because if you think about it, that's going to pour into your consulting business and everything you do because you will do it authentically. You will pour your energy, your love, everything,
Yeah.
right? So what would you say, and we're getting close to the end here, because I'm like, oh my God, this goes so fast and I was going to just keep talking.
Yeah.
What would you say has been the most rewarding of this journey over the last year that you would say and look back now and be like, I'm proud.
Yeah.
I'm proud.
Take the chance. Listen to your heart. Even though it sounds scary as shit, do it. Like your best bet is yourself. And if you don't even try, it's automatically a no. Right?
Yeah.
And if you want help, if you want to, if you want to pursue something, ask, right? And do the same, pay it forward, right? And again, to what you had said before, if you learn this new knowledge, don't just keep it to yourself. Like domino that shit down the road and pull people up with you.
Yeah.
And don't make them have to go through the same hardships you did. Like that's why we do it, so that we can pull people forward and without having to do, the same lessons of adversity, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I try to tell my kids. But I think they're like me; you have to learn through it the hard way, and not always just take my word for it. But they'll learn through it regardless. But I would say that like if it's scary, like get a little pep rally for yourself and kind of just take that first step because that's the first step of many. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but at least you tried. And like what didn't work and how can you try something different? And if not, partner with somebody else life, there's nothing that really can ever be undone, right? Unless some certain absolutes, right? But it just, there's always a life more to lead of figuring out who you want to be. And again, it's just be that change and you're never too old to be what you could have been.
I love that. And I really want to thank you for your transcendencia because that really is flourishing and is clearly coming through that everything you've gone through life has brought you to who you are today. And I can't wait for all the things you're going to do. But even just in the power of, and I live with this, right? Like being present, fill it out, whatever the heck that looks like.
Yeah, make the
right?
space.
Make the space for it. And I think it's so important to ignite that into the next generation. Like you don't have to fake it or pretend. Like let it be the good, the bad, the sad, the happy. I think about this movie with all the colors and the feelings that just came up.
Oh, Inside Out. Yeah.
Inside Out. And I love it because like the new version even brings anxiety. We're in a world of anxiety.
Oh, yeah.
And learning what that looks like, right?
Yeah.
Like rely on friends, ask about it. To your point, I think sometimes out of shyness or like, oh, I don't want to feel dumb or like whatever, like ask. And the reason why we're creating this space is to share experiences. People, things that people normally don't talk about it because it's a lot more common.
Yeah.
And not because they see a smiley, awesome, always looking amazing Sam.
Thank you.
She doesn't always has her shit together and that is okay.
100%. Yeah, you'll probably see me, my hair all screezed, bun looking all mess with a sweatshirt, no makeup at a grocery store. I'm like, I am owning this, right?
Yeah.
And then the next day I could be to the nines doing whatever, right?
Yeah.
Gala one day, buying oranges the next, right? Like that's just the range. But it's like honoring all the layers of who we are.
Yeah.
Every single layer, the good, the bad, the ugly, the gooey center, the hard shell sometimes, right? And it's giving space and grace to that. And, you know, when people are like, you can't have it all, I'm like, you can, but maybe not always at the same time or 75% of the way there. And, you know, what's the gap of what the other 25% is and what can you do? And, you know, it's always going to be, you know, some sort of sacrifice in some way, shape, or form. But how much are you willing? Like, what's the risk of not doing it?
Yeah,
right. And that's always kind of that question for me.
I love all of it. Well, we're coming to an end, but I want to thank you so much for opening up your heart, your space to our audience here in Trascendencia en Acción, for being vulnerable and allowing us to share this journey with you. I know you're coming out on the end of the amazing things that will come out, and know that you have a space here. Reach out to my beautiful amiga chingona. Like I know Chaska's gonna go ways, right? And I can't wait for those partnerships. But thank you for being here and having you. It's such an honor.
It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the space and time.
All right, well, we'll see you at the next episode. Thank you so much for being here. It was such a pleasure having Sam. And don't forget to follow Chaska Consulting.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Awesome. See you next time.